Chapter 10 of Tilda Jane. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. Tilda Jane by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 10. Among Friends. The animal had gone to the door and stood in a listening attitude. "Someone's comin'," said the boy. "Is everything snug?" The three cast hurried glances around the room. Then, shaking off a somewhat uneasy expression, the man stepped to the one and only window of the cabin. "Game warden Perch," he said dryly, "and registered guide Hersey. Comin' spyin' round. Bad luck to 'em." And he sulkily went back to the table. Presently there came a knocking at the door. "Come in," bawled Lucas, not inhospitably, and two men much smarter, cleaner, and more dapper looking than the red-haired man and his sons entered the cabin. "Howdy," they said simultaneously as they stood their guns and snowshoes against the wall and took possession of the two boxes vacated by the boys at a sign from their father. Then, with an appearance of enjoyment, they dragged the boxes near the fire and stretched out their hands to the blaze. 'Tilda Jane saw that they were staring in unmitigated astonishment at her, and with a feeling that she herself was out of the world, and in a place where passers-by were few and infrequent. She examined them in equal interest. "Where'd you come from?" asked the elder of them at last, fixing her with a pair of piercing eyes. "She got keeled over on the old road last night," spoke up Lucas, much to her relief. "Lost her way. Dog here found her," and he motioned toward Poacher, who was surveying the newcomers in cold curiosity. Warden Perch's attention being drawn to the dog, he stared at him earnestly, then turned to his companion. "Ever see that animal before?" "Not near at hand," said the other with a slight sneer. "Guess I've seen his hind legs and the tip of his tail once or twice." "Have some breakfast," said Lucas, who was imperturbably going on with his own. Warden Perch inspected the table. "Not on bacon. Haven't you got something more uncommon?" "We've got some beans in thar," said Lucas, with a backward nod of his head toward a bag on the floor. "Coarse brown beans. They might be a treat for ye, seeing and ye don't get 'em much in hotels." Perch flushed angrily and opened his mouth as if to make a retort. Then he drew a blank book from his pocket, and to calm himself ran his eye over the report he was making for the game commissioner of the state. "Left Nexter 10:55 a.m. March 1st for Bluefield. March 2nd at Bearville 11:30 a.m. Jim Green's camp Lake Clear at 4:35 p.m. March 3rd left camp at 7 a.m. Bill Emerson's camp 9:47 a.m. Reached Moose Yard on backside Fernbrook Ridge 1:47 p.m. 3 moose in yard. Henry," he said, lifting his head and abruptly addressing his companion, "some of those poachers have mighty cute tricks." Henry nodded assent. "Those fellows at Hackmactack Station tried hard to fool us last week. Cut the legs off the deer, then got a couple of bear's feet, and had the bone of a bear's leg slipped up under the skin on the leg of the deer. Then they put them up so slyly in 3 layers of bagging with nothing but bear's feet sticking out. But I caught on to those bear's legs and said the feet weren't big enough. So I had it opened and took the deer and the fellows to Mattawamkeag, and I guess they think $40 apiece was just about enough for a fine." Lucas and his sons burst out laughing, and Tilda Jane shrewdly suspected by their amused faces and knowing glances that they had heard the story before. There was no love lost between these newcomers and her preservers. and Lucas and his sons would be glad when their callers left the cabin. But what was all this talk about deer? Surely they did not kill the pretty creatures whom, without having seen, she loved. She cleared her throat, and in a weak little voice addressed the game warden. "Sir, I've got pictures in my geography of deer with branching horns. Does bad men kill them?" Warden Perch gave her another alert glance. Here was no confederate of poachers. "Yes," he said severely, "bad men do kill them, and dogs chase them. But mind this, young girl, poachers get nabbed in the long run. They slide for a time, but there's a trip up at the end, and they're dogs too. I've shot 3 hounds this week for dogging deer." "You've shot dogs?" repeated 'Tilda Jane in a horrified tone, and pressing Gippie closer to her. "If I didn't shoot them, they'd kill the deer," said the man irritably. "Oh," murmured 'Tilda Jane. Here was one of the mysteries of nature that was quite beyond her comprehension. The dog hunted the deer, and the man hunted the dog. The deer apparently was the weaker one, and she must inquire into the matter. "What does bad men kill deer for?" she asked timidly. "Haven't you ever eaten any deer meat?" asked the warden. "I didn't know it was good to eat," she said sadly. "You haven't had any here in this cabin?" "I guess not, unless I might 'a' eat it when I was fainty." Lucas eyed her peculiarly, and the meaning of the warden's question and offensive manner burst upon her. "That's a good man," she said indignantly, starting from her half-reclining position and pointing to Lucas. "I guess men that takes little girls out of snowbanks don't kill deer." Warden Perch laughed and rose from his seat. He had very little sentiment with regard to the animal creation. "I calculate we'd better be moving," he said to the guide. "Don't suppose we'd see anything to keep us here, unless we'd hang on for the big snowstorm they say is coming, and that I expect you're waiting for." And he looked at Lucas. "Me and my sons," said the latter coolly, "is on our way to David Morse's lumber camp. 2 of his hands had to come out 'count of sickness. We lay out to get thar this evening. Was late in startin' last night, and camped here. We'll have to get this little girl out. Thought you might undertake it, seeing as you've makin' for outside, I s'pose." "Get your own find out," said the warden severely. "It'll keep you out of mischief. And look here, if I find that dog of yours up to tricks, you know what I'll do." "Shoot him on sight," said Lucas, stooping and patting the animal who was pressing close to him. "But you'll never catch him, 'cause he ain't the sort of dog to be catched in any kind of mischief. Hey, poacher?" The guide went out, and the warden with a scowl followed, slamming the door after him. Lucas and his sons crowded to the window to see their callers depart, and when they were fairly out of sight, they burst into relieved laughter and noisily drew their boxes up to the fire. "Say, Pop, ain't he mad?" remarked Joe excitedly. "Mad 'cause you're too cute for him. He'd give his teeth to fasten something on to you." "Shut up," said his father, with a roll of his eye toward 'Tilda Jane. The girl was puzzled. Lucas, who seemed a nice man, was treated as if he were not a friend to the deer, while the departed ones, whom she did not like at all, seemed to be their protectors. "Who are these men?" she asked curiously. "Wall, I'll tell you," said Lucas, taking 2 moose ear skins from his pocket and fitting them together to make a tobacco pouch. "Them 2 is fancy game men. The warden and the guide likes to lounge in easy chairs round hotels and tell of their doin's in the woods, how the poachers tremble and run when they see 'em a comin'. As a rule, they don't take to the woods till they're druv to it by some complaint. Then they're awful fierce and growl and show their teeth and run home. Nobody don't care nothing for 'em." "Are there many men killing deer?" asked the little girl falteringly. "Many men?" groaned Lucas. "Law me, what a question. Last year, little gal, there was awful heavy snow, 8 foot deep in Franklin County, 7 foot in Somerset, Piscataquis, Penobscot, and Aroostook. What a year for big game. They couldn't get away. They was as helpless as sheep. Storm came on storm, till we was walking up among the tree branches and knocking off the snow with a stick. Snow-covered tracks and poachers took possession o' the earth. They lived high in the lumber camps, Pop, do you mind?" said Zebedee, smacking his lips. "When a fellow was starvin', the smell just come out to meet him." "You bet. Only you wasn't thar to smell it," said his father sharply. "You mind that. You young ones takes to the woods too natural." He surveyed them with mingled pride and dissatisfaction, then came back to his reminiscences. "I vum, that was a winter, but the deer would 'a' starved if they hadn't been shot, for the snow was so deep that they couldn't get to their food. That there Perch made a great flurry about gettin' in and drivin' 6 deer to a swamp where they could get green stuff, but I don't believe a word of it. I believe he shot and ate them." "Do you mind the deer that was dogged into our yard, Pop?" exclaimed Joe. "I saw 'em as they crossed the river, dog not 15 foot behind." "And what became of that deer?" asked 'Tilda Jane unsteadily. Lucas winked at his sons and concluded the story himself. "He run across our yard and among the bark pilers at Meek and Sons tannery. When the animal come running down between the bark piles, some of the crew was for killin' him, but I was workin' thar, and I wouldn't let him. He stayed round close to us all day, and when any dog come in sniffed at him, he'd run up close and tremble and ask us to see fair play." "You killed that deer!" exclaimed 'Tilda Jane, bursting into tears. "Oh, why does God let men be so wicked?" Sobs were almost tearing her little lean frame to pieces. She had not worked up gradually to a pitch of emotion, but had fallen immediately into it, and Lucas and his sons stared wonderingly at her. Poor little girl, she looked as if she had come through a sea of troubles, and pity stirred in the man's rough but not unkindly breast. "Shut up now. Shut up, missy," he said soothingly. "We did shoot that feller, but there warn't nowhere to keep him. But deer has been kep'. Soft now, and I'll tell ye of Seth Winthrop, who has a park and is a rich man. Last year, when you couldn't go scarce 5 mile without seeing tracks of blood in the snow, where someone had been slaughterin', a moose was chased near Winthrop's place. He was so dead beat that he just stood and trembled, and one of Winthrop's men put a halter on him and led him to the barnyard and give him fodder and drink, and that livin' young moose is in Winthrop's park today, and he weighs 400 pounds. 'Tilda Jane was still sobbing, and Joe nudged his father. "Tell her about the bear, Pop." "Now, here's something that'll make you laugh," said Lucas kindly. "It's about a bad bear that went and got drunk. I was on a fishing trip, and I had a jug of black strap with me." "Know what that is, little gal?" "No," gasped 'Tilda Jane, who, rather ashamed of her emotion, was trying to sober herself. "Well, it's the State o' Maine name for rum and molasses mixed, and you take it with you in case you get sick. There was some other men with me, and they'd gone off in a boat on the lake. I had a gun, but 'pon my word, I didn't think of using it, 'count of gratitude to that bar for giving me such a treat, just as good as a circus. Well, I must tell you how it happened. I didn't feel well that day. Had a kind of pain, and I was lying on the bank in the sun, foolin' and wishin' I was all right. By and by, thinks I'll go to the camp and have a drink o' black strap. I was most thar when I met a wicked thief bar comin' out. Powers around, he was as tipsy as a tinker. He'd been at my black strap, and I wish you could have seen him. He didn't know where he was at, or where he wanted to be at, and he was jolly and friendly, and seesawed round me, and rolled and swaggered till I thought I'd die laughin'. My pain went like last year's snow, and I walked after that bar till he was out of sight, just like a drunken man he was, making for home, and in the midst of all this foolery, having an idea of where he ought to go. I'd have given a good deal to see Mrs. Barr's face when he arrove. And didn't those other fellers give it to me for not shooting him? I said I couldn't take a mean advantage of his situation. 'Tilda Jane's face was composed now, and with a faint smile she reverted to the subject of the deer. Don't you feel bad when you're killin' them, and they looks at you with their big eyes? Look here, leetle gal, don't you talk no more about them, or you'll have me as much hearted as you be, said Lucas, getting up and going to the window. At present, I ain't got no feelin' about deer, except that what's in the woods is ours. You just stand up and try your feet. It's going to snow, and I'd like to get you out of here. Did you ever try to teeter along on snowshoes? No, sir, she said, getting up and walking across the room. Lucas was anxiously surveying the sky. 'Pears like it was going to snow any minute. The last thaw took the heft of it off the ground. You'd have never got in this fur if it hadn't, and we're bound to have another big fall. It ain't fur to the road, and I guess you and Zebedee better start. Let me see you walk, sissy." 'Tilda Jane tottered back to her seat. "It's a smart trot home," observed Zebedee. "Do you think she could foot it?" "Pop, it's snowing now," said Joe, who had taken his father's place at the window. With almost incredible rapidity, there had been a change in the weather. A small and sullen cloud had hidden the dreamy, thoughtful sun, and out of the cloud came wheeling, choking gusts, bearing bewildered snowflakes up and down, hither and thither, before allowing them to alight turbulently upon the quiet earth. "That's quick," muttered Lucas philosophically. "We'll have to put off opinions till it's over," and he again sat down by the fire. The wind tore around the small cabin furiously, seeking an entrance but finding none. Outside, at least, he could have his will, and his vengeance fell upon the sturdy young firs and spruces, who at this fierce word of command threw off their burdens of snow and bent and swayed before his wrath as wildly as the most graceful hardwood saplings. The older trees bent more reluctantly. They had seen many winters, many storms, yet occasionally a groan burst from them as the raging breath of the wind monster blew around some decaying giant and hurling him to the ground. 'Tilda Jane pictured the scene without and cowered closer to the fire. Gippie was on her lap, Poacher beside her, and this man with his two boys, who at present personified her best friends in the world, were safe and warm in their shelter. Her dark face cleared, and in dreamy content she listened to the string of hunting stories reeled off by the two boys, who, without addressing her directly, were evidently stimulated by the knowledge that here was an interested, appreciative, and brand new listener. End of Chapter 10. Recording by John Brandon.